Hello, everyone. Good morning, and you're welcome to what I consider another exciting and interesting discussions at the 14th edition of the MEDays Forum. That occurs every year, where we try to examine and explore challenges that confront Africa, but also walk away with interest, insights, networks, and connections that help us forge the development of Africa. This morning, we shall be having a discussion around the healthcare systems that we have in Africa, specifically addressing the subject of healthcare and pharmaceutical industries in Africa in the time of COVID, but most importantly, examining the extent to which we can democratize access to medical products that prevent major outbreaks. So I'm sure this is something that all of us that lived through the COVID pandemic, I suspect we all will be familiar with. But what seldom is discussed or talked about extensively are the individuals behind the strategies and the approaches that we use. We used, first of all, in the management of the pandemic, but most importantly, the healthcare systems that get designed in association with that. And now, two key statistics I think are relevant for certain context, for this particular conversation. One is that if you look across the continent today, the production of pharmaceutical products, Africa accounts for just about 0.7% globally. Now that's scary. Outside of that, we equally are informed by the data as well that the industry for pharmaceuticals, that is, in Africa has been growing in the last couple of years at about 10%. So clearly, there's some opportunity there that can be explored from an industrial perspective. But what are these opportunities? What do they look like? What sort of institutional architecture do we require to make that happen? And I am joined by individuals from different backgrounds, but who all work within the pharmaceutical industry. To my immediate left, you have Tanger. Please, when I introduce her, you show some appreciation at least. So let's put a round of applause for her. Yeah. Now, Kauta is a biotech executive and serves, at a very high level of corporate pharmaceutical industry in Africa. Next to her, we have Abimbola Adebaking, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Health Africa. Please, a round of applause for her for making time to join this conversation. And then to her left, we have Mariam Bigdeli, who is the World Health Organization representative here in the Kingdom of Morocco. Please put your hands together for her. What for me is interesting and exciting about this panel is that they're all female. And so I think we get to bring some human parts. I don't have anything against my fellow gender, but I think that conversations like this, when we have women in the room, a lot of the time we tend to move the conversation and explore from different perspectives. So I'm very excited about this one and looking forward to it. We shall spend about 30, 40 minutes going through a series of questions, and then we shall open up to you, the audience, to ask any questions that you may have. And I suspect that they will be more than ready to take these questions. I'll start off with you, Kauta. So we've talked about a potential gap in terms of manufacturing of pharmaceuticals in Africa. We've equally seen the existence of an opportunity, right? The industry has been growing at a certain trend. As an executive who works in the industry, perhaps you can frame the current attractiveness, if you like, of what the pharmaceutical industry looks like in Africa and what we can potentially do, if any, to further explore and expand that so we can expand the development of the industry.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I think from an investor perspective, the attractiveness of any investment, the investor will look at the size of the opportunity or the size of the market. He will look at the demand, the high demand, ideally. Then he will look at the capacity of a country or multiple countries to deliver in terms of quality of products. An investor in pharmaceutical industry will look into the pricing strategies that are implemented as well, because it gives him or her the margins. And last but not least, he would look into the practicalities of exporting the excess of productions elsewhere. So, for example, he will look at the regulations, whether they are harmonized across countries. He will look at the pooling of procurements to ensure the high demand that I spoke about. They will look at the free trade agreements, the tariffs across countries for the custom clearance. They will also, I believe, look into the capacity of distribution, so the supply chains, and whether these supply chains are fast or digitalized, ideally, because this is the benchmark in China, for example. I think those are the elements from an investor perspective. So if I go back to the first one that I mentioned, which is the size of the market, the African pharmaceutical market overall is valued at around $53 billion. It's peanuts when you compare it to the US market or the Japanese market. But it's a big market. Sub-Saharan Africa only, if we exclude all the North African region, Sub-Saharan Africa market is valued at around 14 billion. As a benchmark, India is valued at 16 billion. India, a country. Us, Sub-Saharan Africa, 46 countries, I believe, in Sub-Saharan Africa, is exactly the same value.
That's just a cash flow of one company.
So I am not undervaluing the African market. I'm just saying that there is a potential, there is an opportunity, but there are a lot of things to do. So I put the hat of an investor and gave you what I would be looking at before putting my money on the table. Now, there are other levers which could be done by the government in our countries, each of our governments. And I think policymakers, I hope they will listen to this talk, could, for example, implement tax breaks and subsidies. Or they would think about free zones. Morocco has done this, for example, for the automobile industry. So maybe we could imagine a drug medicine city in each of our countries. Another level the government could leverage is the workforce, building the talent and providing the incentives to the workforce to stay in the country, because without workforce there is nothing. You can put the money, but if you don't have the workforce, is useless. Last but not least, the government could implement the right pricing strategies to incentivize those manufacturers who produce locally. So, for example, they could favor them during the national tenders, for instance, or incentivize those countries who would commit to a volume of production. So those are just some elements. Yeah, I forgot to mention that definitely we know that all these levers cannot be reunited, all of them within each and every country, but this is the opportunity to think as a region or as a hub, thinking about the Western hub, the Southern hub, the Eastern hub, where countries could complement themselves in matter of regulatory, in matter of oversight, in matter of manufacturing, production, distribution, etc. Yeah, I'll stop here for now.
Well, so thank you very much for those reflections, and I think it sets us right, into further exploring the kinds of healthcare systems that we have. You did talk about supply chains, for example, right? And I think a lot of the time that goes on into exploring the systems that we have. And here I'm coming to you, Abimbola. In terms of the systems that we have around supply chain, She's indicated a number of things around regulatory environments across countries, harmonization, of not thinking in silos, right? When you look at the healthcare systems in Africa today, based on the understanding that Kauta brings to this conversation in terms of what is exciting for an investor, right? When you look at the healthcare systems we have, you think they are set up properly, based on these metrics that we have?
So a system, thank you for that question. I think a system can be interpreted in many ways.
Right.
But one way that I look at the health system is in 4 perspectives. One is to look at the processes, to look at the people, to look at the policies, and then the products that are involved. So she's talked about the size of the pharmaceutical market. And yes, it is small, but it can expand. Because not only are we on a huge population trajectory, for example, there are statistics to show that Nigeria right now is the 6th largest country in the world, and by year 2040, year 2050, we will be the 3rd largest. So you have to prepare for that population. So the products you put in place, the reliance on internal supply system as against external vulnerabilities, as COVID showed us. Because if China and India had closed their borders to the export of APIs and finished products to Africa, we would have died, not from COVID, but from supply inefficiencies. So we must begin to think about the health system from those 4 perspectives. And just to give a bit of context, Africa right now has 1.3 billion, 1.4 billion people, a huge youth population that would not die out soon, but would grow. And so we're going to be commanding more demand for health in terms of health services, health products, and health facilities. What are we doing about this growth of people? Who is going to serve the people? Certainly, we do not have enough brick and mortar to meet our current demands, and we cannot have brick and mortar for the future demands. Therefore, we need to think holistically about technology and anything that will digitalize healthcare and ensure that nobody is left behind. So when I think of democratization of health, and I think of health systems, I think, how am I going to make sure that the 10,000, 20,000 medical doctors, right now Nigeria has 24,000 serving a population of 216 million. It's just not enough. But how am I going to make sure that we have enough going forward? Is to utilize one for a bigger volume. So when WHO recommends that you need 1 doctor for 1,000 people, and we have 1 doctor now for 10,000, how can we address that? That's my worry around people. The exodus of Africans, especially Anglophone African medical personnel, to the West is a huge concern. And we must build a way to fortify ourselves. You cannot tell a medical doctor to go, not to leave. He's going to want to leave because he has economic pressures. But what would make you still derive value from that doctor even when he's away? What would help is technology. What would help are systems that encourage task shifting. What would help is a system where we build networks, and therefore we're not just relying on one facility, but we're building specialized networks. You have cardiac conditions, you go to a cardiac hospital. It's much better than sending someone to a general hospital. So there are many things around people in the system. When you talk about policies, you must put in place policies that favor the use of technology. You must put in place policies that attract funding into health, not as just a social innovation or social intervention, as we have now. We have donations and we have all sorts of policies around that. But we must put in place policies that strengthen funding to come in. And whoever is funding knows that they will get their returns when they are patient for 7 years, 10 years, 15 years. I think our policies are lagging behind right now. They're a bit too narrow. They're disease-focused rather than system-focused. And if we do more around system and then approach it in a systematic way, I think we'll get there. So we're giving ourselves 5 to 10 years to be systematic about building the whole system. So just for emphasis, the whole health system is like a human body. And so if your little toe, you hit it, the head cannot say I'm all right because the pain is all around, right? So it's across. That's the way we must think about health. From primary to secondary to tertiary levels, from rural to urban to peri-urban areas, from the doctor to the nurse to the pharmacist. So we must think holistically when we're thinking about health. I also mentioned processes. So whatever we're doing in health to enhance our productivity or performance would be good. We currently have archaic processes that are just not serving today. Those who are accessing our care are also accessing care in other industries. We're serving more sophisticated clients. We call them clients, but in pharmacy or in health, we call them patients. They're not necessarily patients, they're clients. They're being served by more sophisticated airlines, hotels, e-commerce. And we think the same people should be fined with archaic methods. They queue for hours to get access to a medical doctor, but when they get to a hotel, they get instant service. The same human being must think that how can we enhance our efficiency to make sure we serve that same consumer in the way he has become used to in other sectors. Healthcare cannot continue to give excuses for being the laggard in adopting technology. Healthcare cannot continue to give excuses for being the laggard in customer satisfaction and customer attractiveness. Look at the health insurance system. Right now, health insurance in Africa is far behind. If you look at us as a whole, we're nice. But as countries, it's horrible. In Nigeria, with 216 million people, we have less than 3% who are insured. But if you were to conduct a survey and say, do you want to be insured? You have 80, 70% saying they want to be insured. So there's a huge gap between 80 and 3%. If you look at it, how are we bridging that gap? You cannot bridge it with traditional health insurance. You cannot mandate your way out of this system. You must think creatively. And so I'm saying policies, processes, people, and the products. And I will come lastly to products. When I think of a health system, I think, we look as though we do not have strengths in Africa. But we do. I had a quick chat with Carter and I talked about herbal medication. We can solve cancer if we look into our bushes. I am personally convinced that Africa has answers to some global diseases. Imagine an Africa that is exporting the answers to cancer. Who is sitting down to build a 10, 15, 20-year plan to discover what is there in abundance in our bushes and convert it for commercial purposes to export to the world? Why do we keep thinking of Western medicines when we think about health? It's almost a disservice. We're almost so we're sold onto it because it's what is readily available, and I hear that. I take those medicines as well. But I think that we're not building enough into our system to prepare for a 10, 20-year investigation and discovery of solutions from Africa. So I would say some more as we talk about manufacturing in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these reflections. I think, please put your hands together. If you want to show appreciation, it's fine. It's allowed. Because for a minute, I thought I was sitting in a crash course for industrial manufacturing in the healthcare sector. But I think that those points around people, processes, practices, people, processes, products, and most importantly, policy, I think they go right at the heart, of the systems that you've described, which for me really sort of is at the heart of the institutional architecture that we have in certain respects for the management of healthcare systems as you have described them. And so I'll go to you. Marianne. You work from a multilateral perspective. You've heard two industrialists who really have unpacked what the opportunities look like, what Africa needs to do from a private sector point of view, some of which is happening, right? And I think Abimbola equally points out to four fundamental factors, but I think in that, there is the conversation around policy, which more often than not is driven by a lot of multilateral, bilateral engagements around the pharmaceutical industry. When you look at the institutional architecture today, how do we set it up, if it is not set up that way, to help unlock the value that you have heard from Kauta and Abimbola?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think I'm going to build on indeed what my colleagues have already said in terms of the industry development. I think what I heard from Abimbola is very, very interesting, because she pointed to systems thinking. Yeah. You know, in terms of how you think about health systems, any health system in Africa or elsewhere, you need to really think about it in terms of system. And the metaphor of the little toe and the brain pain is really a great metaphor in terms of systems thinking. I would extend that thought to the entire continent, not just to a country's health system, but to the entire continent and the entire world. So you mentioned that the shortage of human resources. Actually, the shortage of human resources is a worldwide issue. And you take human resources from one country to put it in another country, and you basically recreate the problem elsewhere. You solve a problem somewhere and recreate the problem elsewhere. So it's the entire sort of system that needs to be rethought. Now, in terms of how multilateral organizations can help develop the industry in Africa, one of the issues is that investors are also interested in strong national regulatory authorities. Right. They want to have a reliable partner to whom they can go and say, you know, here's a new product that I want to market. I need to know what's the time flow. You know, how much time will you take to examine this dossier? I need to have a reliable partner to be able to discuss pricing. I need to have a reliable partner also to be able to produce it. And therefore, I need to have an assurance that the production is going to follow some quality assurance. That is something that multilateral partners, for example, collaboration among African countries can bring. Right. In terms of, for example, pre-qualifying industries for being industries that are already, WHO has a pre-qualification system, for example, for production lines or for quality control labs. And once you are pre-qualified by WHO, you can be answered to international bids, for example. You are already ready to sell on the international market. So that's something that's really important in terms of how we can strengthen collaboration. Another aspect is, of course, the African Union question that the African Union has already put a lot of effort in terms of coordinating different countries through the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Initiative, which brings together regulatory authorities, indeed, to build their capacity, to build their processes, to harmonize their processes, to make sure that there is interoperability between those regulatory authorities, and to make sure that one country, I mean, in the future, when the medicine is approved in one country, it has fast-track approval in another country through those exchange of information and capacities. And that's an extremely important endeavor. We need to make sure that we reach the goals of that collaboration that was set. If it's not too ambitious, if it's really, you know, we monitor this process on a regular basis to make sure it's on track and reaching its results. And the third point that I wanted to mention in terms of how to build capacity at the continental level, there are a lot of capacity building collaboration that needs to be set up. It's already happening. For example, WHO has a number of collaborating centers, and I'm going to mention one in Morocco which is the WHO Collaborating Center for Pharmacovigilance. So what are WHO Collaborating Centers? Are centers of excellence that are identified in different countries in the world or at regional level, and who serve as a center of excellence not only for the country where they are sitting, but also at international level. And for example, the WHO Collaborating Center for Pharmacovigilance in Morocco has been able to train a lot of other Francophone countries in terms of how to do pharmacovigilance. So what's pharmacovigilance? It's when a drug is on the market, after when it's starting to be used, you need to make sure that adverse events are recorded. And that these adverse events are examined to see if this is just random or if there is a pattern there and that drug must be really looked at, or that vaccine for that matter. So it's extremely important to make sure that the drugs are remaining safe and that people are safe when using them. So there's a lot of capacity building that's needed. Pharmacovigilance is a very, very important aspect, because otherwise you're going to really potentially harm the population without knowing it. And that capacity really needs to be built on the continent. And that's something that where you know, cross-country collaboration and exchange of good practices and learning, institutionalized way of exchange of good practices and learning can really help support the building a system across countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those reflections as well. And I think on the last point you make, you know, around cross-collaboration for pharmacovigilance, I was going to ask you, Abimbola, whether, you know, technology has any role in that and what that looks like.
Absolutely. So when you take the medication for, maybe you've got a pain, and then it gives you diarrhea, and you check all the side effects and none talks about diarrhea, that's an unusual response to the medication.
Right.
The manufacturer needs to know that. And if you report it and 50 other people report it, the manufacturer is going to have to do something. Either begin to include that amongst the symptoms or side effects, you know, or begin to just, you know, work on it. Maybe the formulation needs to be tempered, sugar-coated, or, you know, enteric-coated, or whatever. Now, imagine if those 50 people used it for one day and could report immediately using an app on a phone. That's faster response to the manufacturer. So as many adverse drug reaction platforms that you can create and popularize and make sure people get to it, or deploy through pharmacies or through clinics, you are enhancing reporting via technology. And then imagine when you can do more studies with such people, and you can do it in as far-flung as villages, or using some reporting system. Because technology doesn't just have to be apps. It could be simple technology like SMS, right, USSD, simple things just to report. Definitely technology helps.
Fantastic point there. And the point about USSD, I mean, if you look at mobile phone penetration in Africa now, not everybody can afford, you know, the sophisticated smartphone that can deploy apps. So I think that's a very interesting intervention there as well. Dr. Bigdeli, you also did indicate the possibility of multilateral organizations from a systems point of view pre-qualifying, you know, some pharmaceutical companies. And we've seen these examples work in other areas such as waste management, for example. We've seen that work in other much more complex, well, not complex, but other industries that tend to find, you know, priorities, you know, in Africa. But I'll come back to you, Kautar, now. So I think what we have been exploring in the last, 30, 40 minutes has been understanding whether there are opportunities here, and also looking at institutional architecture. How do we think systems-wise? How can we leverage, you know, bilateral, multilateral actors to support, you know, that agenda so we are proper prepared? What I'm coming to you now for, do you think we are ready? Do you think the industry, as it is today, is ready? What would you say about readiness of the industry?
Would you like me to to be straightforward and frank.
No, don't do me a yes or no.
Always.
Don't do me a yes or no. Let's benefit from your understanding and experience in the space.
I mean, we started to discuss this with Abimbola, and definitely we are very excited, and we value the opportunity of Africa being economically diversified, to see local manufacturing arriving at our shores, to see our populations being treated internally, to have nearshore supply chains, etc., for drug delivery. But we are also realistic. We are not completely ready, at least not all. Let me frame it this way, in a positive way, because this is what I think. Not all the countries are ready for local manufacturing, but others are.
Right.
So why don't we capitalize on those countries that are ready, that have done some work, or that are a little bit more advanced, for them to distribute, to manufacture and distribute to the other countries. I'm thinking, for example, about Egypt, North Africa. I'm thinking about South Africa for the South. I'm thinking about, maybe for vaccines, I would think about Senegal.
Senegal, yes.
Are you from Senegal?
No, I'm not.
Okay. For other medicines, I wouldn't put forward Senegal. Right. But for vaccines, yes. Let me, so I have shared my answer and my thoughts, but let me set up the full picture about the market, and so that you can understand why I think the way I think with regard to this question. The African pharmaceutical market is clustered, right? Most of the manufacturing facilities are in North Africa. I'm including Egypt with North Africa, of course. The operations in North Africa are small, meaning that the manufacturing facilities are not running at full speed. They have a low capacity, it was mentioned by Miriam, and a low utilization. We can fix that. But first, let's diagnose what's the problem. From a regulatory perspective, again, Miriam has mentioned the regulatory framework and the harmonization initiative that has been done very recently, 2021. It has been done only for vaccines. It hasn't been done for all the medicines. What does it mean? It means that we cannot, even if we think as a hub and as a region and there is the coordination, etc., as of today, maybe tomorrow things will change, but as of today, we cannot put forward a single registration for a new medicine across 4 countries at once. We just cannot. So, I mentioned low capacity and utilization. I mentioned the regulatory framework in terms of harmonization. But there is also another thing, because if our manufacturing facilities are not pre-qualified by the label of the WHO to produce for us, but also for exportation. Why exportation is important? Because it has a direct impact on our balance of trade, currency, right? We need dollars, we need euros. So export is, if we think strategically and politically about why should we manufacture locally, the first thing to think about after serving our populations and healthcare is the trade. We need to have a balance of trade that is positive with currency. Yes, there will be job creation. Yes, there will be some affordability, not much, perhaps in terms of price minus 12% or so from the price of a drug, but it's mainly the trade. If you ask me, shall we continue importing our drugs from India and elsewhere, or shall we manufacture? My answer would be straightforward. We should manufacture. We should manufacture. There is an upside. I just mentioned the upside of manufacturing locally. But we need to fix all these ailments, the pre-qualification by the WHO for us to have a good regulatory framework that was mentioned by Miriam, the capacity of production. So we need to increase the utilization and the capacity of production. Yes, I think I'll stop here for now.
Well, again, very interesting intervention there, and you sort of flipped the narrative around, to examine it from a local manufacturing point of view, which I think is very important, right? Because more often than not, when we have thought about it, I think we haven't really considered the local manufacturing capacity to be able to do that. But you mentioned two important things, and I want you both, Abimbola and Dr. Bigdeli, to be reflecting on these, because I'm coming back to you now. So she has indicated the possibility of pre-qualification of manufacturers, not for domestic production and consumption. Once we satisfy that, pre-qualification for potential exports. Is that within the thinking of the WHO when you're thinking of pre-qualification? So that question is going to come to you, Dr. Bigdeli, right? And Abimbola, so again, we've seen discussions around regulatory frameworks. We've seen, I think you indicated trade as well, Kautar, right? Would you say the current framing of the Continental Free Trade Agreement or area that we have in Africa today, would you say that it has provisions that helps us unlock that value? Because we have seen for vaccines, COVID, for example, she indicates, there's a part of me that believes that COVID may have, the vaccines and COVID may have happened because we had a certain emergency or exigency on our hand. But if we think beyond COVID and think beyond the vaccine, and we're thinking broadly about pharmaceutical products, more generally, as you indicated, that products and the diversity of products and how we're doing that, whether we're investing and finding new treatments for cancer, for example, do you think the current framing of the Continental Free Trade Area has that rationale in it that supports you as a private sector person? I'll start with you, Dr. Bigdeli, first, and then I'll come to you, Abimbola, for your reaction to that question.
Yes. I'm a bit of a minority in this panel in terms of coming from the public health perspective rather than the industry and the
we're hijacking
commerce and industrial development perspective. WHO's initial sort of thought in terms of putting forward the pre-qualification program was not to boost exports.
Right.
It's really to ensure access.
Access, yes.
Which can be the same thing or not. Sometimes it's the same thing and sometimes it's not. It's about making sure that, for example, generic production is a level of standard that can allow countries to access cheaper medicines, or at least medicines at an affordable price, and that they can be sure of the quality, because there has been a lot of debate around the world with generics are not as the same quality as the originator, or some generics are of better quality than others, etc., etc. So the idea is to make sure that people access quality medicines at an affordable price, and that there is we are removing some barriers by saying, well, these are trusted sources that you can use. Because if countries want to each time verify that whether the source they're procuring from is a trusted source, it's going to take a long time. They may not have the capacity to do so. Some countries don't have the capacity to go themselves and verify some sources. Maybe some European countries have it, but some other countries don't. So the idea for WHO to step in as a neutral party and also say, we identify a number of trusted sources you can procure medicines from. And for certain medicines, you have this trusted source, and for other medicines, you have another trusted source. It's not like across the board that we qualify for certain drugs. So, and we did that also for vaccines, of course. And we also do that for quality control laboratories because, for example, in Morocco, there is pre-qualified laboratory for quality control. And those are the labs that go and control the quality of the production. But we also pre-qualify the lab itself and say, well, this lab is doing a good job at pre-qualifying or testing the quality of drugs. And so if this lab has tested, then the drug is okay, or the production is okay. But it serves a public health purpose. And why? I mean, the whole story started when you know, with AIDS medicines and the scandal of AIDS medicines in early 2000 and the difficulty of some patients in Africa to access those medicines while they were available in the United States. And the price of those medicines were horrendous. And this was really a human right issue. And from there started really thinking about how the generic drug industry could step in and really be a public health asset. Not only generic, but also the originator could if there is no generic available, you know, there are some responsibilities that the pharmaceutical industry have with regard to public health goals, AIDS being one, but not the only one. And therefore, the pre-qualification program started looking at how access could be improved through that program. Now, of course, it is, on top of that, quite an asset for export. Because obviously, if you are pre-qualified and you serve a public health purpose, and a country needs to procure that medicine for their public health needs, they're going to go to those trusted sources in priority. And so it serves the double purpose of exports and public health.
And public health. Yes, no, go ahead. Yes. Before we go to Abimbola.
You mentioned what's the vision beyond COVID. And I heard the argument put forward by Miriam, which is to increase access. Definitely, we need to increase access. But we need to also be ambitious with ourselves. It's not only about generics and cheap or cheaper medicines. I don't think that an African can accept that there are top-notch drugs that are researched and commercialized elsewhere and that he or she cannot access it. We need to access the generics because our budgets are stretched, but we need also to access innovation. We need to think about other business models to access those medication. So in the context of local manufacturing that is put forward by the regional and the global initiatives in Africa, I think we need to capitalize on one thing. There is currently a global initiative that has a goal to include the low middle income countries, Africa and Latin America and Asia Pacific, etc., and enable them to build a biosecurity, a sustainability, and equity of access. We need to. This initiative is led by the WHO, and it is called ACT. And the beautiful things in it is that it enables the building of mRNA platforms in Africa. Guess what? Yeah. mRNA is what is used in the vaccine of Moderna or Pfizer that we got for COVID. But mRNA platform has other applications than the COVID. it could be potentially applied in treating infectious diseases. We have a public health problem of infectious diseases here, tuberculosis, malaria. If the mRNA platform that is put forward by the WHO through this initiative, this global initiative named ACT, is if this mRNA platform succeeds and it is validated for COVID, that means that we could use it to develop other medicines for the infectious diseases. And that would be amazing.
Right.
There is Afrigen, a company in South Africa. Its name is Afrigen. It is doing this work now. So they are developing all the process upstream. Exactly what is being done in Pfizer and Moderna in the US is being done in Africa, in South Africa. And the WHO has designated 6 countries in the continent: Senegal, Tunisia,
South Africa is not there?
Egypt, South Africa, of course. Morocco is not there. Kenya is to be determined. So we keep our fingers crossed, yeah.
And see where that goes. But that's actually a very interesting reflection there, you know, that we can't sit on our oars. We need to sort of explore in an ambitious manner, you know, to almost leapfrog and catch up with where innovation is, and not necessarily focus on what we're doing in our small circles, but also do that and think about our major problems, infectious diseases, right, which we tend to be grappling with. But let me come to you now. So we do all the techie stuff, we do all the policy stuff. Do we have the right institutional framework? If you think about AFTA, right, if we solve these problems that we've seen, is AFTA giving you the opportunity as a private sector person to be able to think across, you know, different markets like that?
So certainly it does. It thinks of a one Africa trading hub.
Right.
We've got the population, and we have a growing population. So definitely, ACTA has captured that in one way. But they've given themselves 15 years, you know? So it's a slow journey. And I just wanted to respond to Miriam, and I think you took the words out of my mouth about being ambitious. Because you see, we'll never be perfect, we'll never be ready. I have an entrepreneur's mind. And the entrepreneur is like the duck that is, you know, you're on water and you look very cool. But underwater, what is happening? A lot of crazy flapping is happening. I think the WHO has not quite moved at the pace that Africa needs. I think in policy setting and so on, yes, fine. But you cannot also be the bottleneck in accrediting and certifying many of these laboratories or pharmaceutical companies. I know of large pharmaceutical companies in Nigeria that are ready to manufacture WHO standard medication to export. But the process is frustrating. The process is not enabling. It's almost disabling. And so the country still spends huge amounts of money to import medication that we can make because we don't have a stamp from WHO. When will we get this stamp? It's taking too long. You're not encouraging enterprise. And we need to encourage enterprise and centers of excellence across the whole of Africa. You've mentioned the Center of Excellence, Senegal. Beautiful. They made themselves known during COVID, and they have continued to pursue it. Can we not have more centers? Work with them in their unready state and put all that requires to bring them up. I think we can. You know? So the pace at which we're moving is too slow. The policies and the systems, you know, that are being put in place are too unambitious. And Africa needs to leap. And we're still crawling because we're taking our cue from those who think that what we deserve are generics. You know, there's so many issues here, and it's quite frustrating for the enterprise or the enterprising companies that are pharmaceuticals that are sticking out their necks and making sure they're still producing, whether there's power or there's no power, whether the workforce is downing tools or not. I think WHO needs to move faster. If there's anything that I would say from this forum, please, we need our institutions to work faster in tandem with the energy that is in Africa to be self-sufficient. We're moving too slowly.
Fantastic intervention there. I think that when you say we need to sort of double up, on our efforts beyond policy frameworks, I think that the most important timeline there is that, and I think it's at the heart of our conversation today, right? Which is democratization of the industry for the production of vaccines, medicines, what have you, right? And why democratization for me is important is because then, it's at the heart of the discussion around access. So if the process for certification, pre-qualification is a little too slow, you can see where the possible effects may be. But yes, go ahead. I think your microphone is off. Maybe you want to turn it on?
Question to WHO, so I need a platform.
Yes, so I'll come to you right. Let's see. Will that work better?
Thanks. Yeah, I think for democratization, we spoke about access. I would like to see democratization and equity in the clinical trials. I would love to see more African represented in the clinical trials, particularly in the targeted medicines, those medicines that target a gene or a mutation, because the genetic heritage of African people is different from Caucasians. So at least when you test a new drug, a new targeted medicine, in a clinical trial, you cannot have only Caucasians in this clinical trial. You need to have a representativeness, or you need to have the
representation from Africa as well.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Dr. Bigdeli, over to you. Yes, and I like that the question is not coming from me. It's coming from the panel member. That's fine.
I'm taking up the challenge, but I definitely need, if there's a direct address to WHO, I definitely need the time to be able to answer it. You are absolutely right, and we would love to be able to move faster. The pre-qualification unit at headquarters is one of the biggest human resource unit, and yet it's not enough. There is, since COVID and since Dr. Tedros came in office, a move to look at sustainable financing of WHO. And this is a huge issue, and there's a huge issue African countries need to push for, because we do need multilateralism. The COVID crisis did show that multilateralism is needed. If WHO doesn't have the resources to work as a multilateral organization that you need as a member state and other stakeholders, it doesn't. If it doesn't have the resources to be able to work, to be the organization that you need to push for the member states, the funders of WHO, to be able to enable the organization to do its work. It's not that because we don't want to do that pre-qualification process fast enough for you to be able to work. It's just that we're short in resources, and we're looking at sometimes crisis management, and we would need to invest more. And of course, there are new models for which we need to work, and those new models need to be put in place. But WHO is a secretariat of member states. Those models need to be presented to representatives of member states. It's not like WHO will go and decide to do things. There are governance mechanisms, so that there's the World Health Assembly, there are regional committees, there is the executive boards. Every single country is represented in those governance instances. And so there is also a route to really push for those agendas is with national governments, to be able to bring that voice in the governance mechanisms of WHO and say, this is These are the things that we need to be able to work at a country level. That's one thing. The second thing is that at domestic level, of course, you know, the pharmaceutical production, and that's, for example, an objective that Morocco has, to have a domestic production that will go towards sustainability of the pharmaceutical sector in Morocco. And every country can have that objective at domestic level. And for being able to achieve that objective at domestic level, we're not talking continent, we're talking domestic now, you don't necessarily need WHO in the pre-qualification process. You need a strong regulatory system. And that's something else that needs to be invested on, right? You know, going beyond that domestic level of authority and approval is for export, etc. But at least, you know, if you want to reach, if you are able to cover the domestic needs, it's the national regulatory authorities and the quality control processes that you also need to be pushing for at country level. Just finishing on the ACT accelerator that you mentioned earlier.
About, yes.
Yes, just to clarify something is that WHO does not designate a country to be part or not part. No, I'm sorry. No. That's not how it works.
We can change the word maybe, if designated is not the right word, but they have selected 6 countries.
Can I please comment? Yes?
So let's let her clarify that, and then we'll come to you for a reaction.
Yeah. It's also the countries that come forward to be part, and there is a process of eligibility and committees sitting and examining this. It's not just WHO. The ACT Accelerator is a collaboration. There are independent scientific committees sitting and examining the pre-qualification process, the vaccine submissions, the countries that want to come forward, etc. So I really want to emphasize the fact that you can't point to WHO as being an omniscient organization sitting and picking an industry and saying this one is pre-qualified, that country is selected, and so on and so forth. No, there are governance mechanisms in place,
right,
including for ACT.
Right.
There are independent bodies that sit and examine. So it's not WHO. It's those independent governance mechanisms that will examine countries' readiness, willingness also to be part of the process, and that they will then issue recommendations for selecting this country or not country. So WHO is a secretariat that works for those independent governance
bottom
bodies.
line, countries like Morocco, because you represent Morocco at the WHO, countries like Morocco were not selected to host the mRNA hub. I don't know if they have applied, maybe they didn't, but they were not selected, and there cannot be, I did my homework, yeah, I did my homework. 6 countries. Tunisia has been selected. Do you know why? I suspect why. Of course, I do not work at the WHO, and I do not know why they selected Tunisia, but I do also know that they have the WHO pre-qualification for the vaccine against rabies. Senegal has the pre-qualification for vaccine against yellow fever. Oh, what a coincidence. I see Tunisia and Senegal eligible because they already have the WHO qualification for other things, but I do not see Morocco. I am entitled to my question. Only the question, not the answers.
Dr. McDaniel, let's hear your reaction. I'm enjoying this, by the way.
The WHO representative in Morocco and not Morocco's representative in WHO. It's the other way around. First thing. And second, I think you need to examine the process of applying to be part of ACT.
Right. Well, thank you very much for those reactions. And I think that perhaps we will be opening up to take some questions from you in the audience. So I want to, okay, some hands are already up. I was going to tell you, you can start thinking about your questions while I go to Abimbole, because I've had, so I'll come to you. I'll take a number of questions on the phone. We've got 20 minutes, right? For you, only for you in the audience. So let's get one final reaction from the panel here. So we heard, what Dr. Bigdeli made a submission, and I think to some extent Carter as well, that, countries need to at least put their best foot forward, right? And so if, at least from a WHO perspective, when we think about democratization and all the metrics around that, how we can dice it up, is there room for the African Union? And what do you, first of all, do you know anything they're doing about that? I mean, if the process around WHO is a little slow, what's the level of engagement at the African Union Commission, at least from an African perspective, right, for the purposes of driving this agenda?
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I think it's working. You may try now.
I'm sorry. Hello?
Perhaps you can use mine? Right.
All right. Okay. I'm sorry, I cannot speak for the AU. I know very little about the AU and their efficiencies. I also cannot even speak for the government of Nigeria, because I think the government is still skewed about bureaucratic processes much more than what the people really need. I'll give you an example. If you look at the total spend of government on medication, drugs, the total investment from government plus the multilateral agencies, funding agencies, is just about 20 to 30% of total money spent on pharmaceuticals in Nigeria. Where's the rest coming from? The people. And the people are underrepresented in decisions around the medicines they get. Access, affordability, and quality. We're over-concerned with funding agencies from abroad. We're over-concerned in making sure they're happy with us, yet their total contribution is not up to 30% of the spend on pharmaceuticals. I think on that basis, government, AU, they're just not the agents to get things done. I don't know the answer, but I'm just pointing out how we have overemphasized AU, overemphasized government, and we have de-emphasized what the people themselves want and how to get there. The private sector is struggling with many, many parts, but I think we should listen more to the private sector when we have these conversations. Otherwise, government will represent us on one level, but it's a limited intervention. I need government to focus on creating an enabling environment to attract private sector involvement in healthcare. We're too afraid that if you bring the private into healthcare, they will be capitalists. They will over-milk. But we're doing it at the detriment of quality. We're doing it at the detriment of innovation around affordability. We're doing it at the detriment of even the access that government wants to guarantee. So it's not working.
Right. I mean, so what I hear you say is, policymakers and actors have to be equally innovative and keep in tune with the times and expectations for the private sector.
It's just not in their nature. They follow process, and bureaucracy is fantastic. Bureaucracy is important for control and for quality at the end of the day. But is that an innovative pipeline? No.
Right. Well, thank you very much for those reactions. I'm going to take questions now. I saw a hand. Please appreciate them. I think it's been an excellent responses to questions and discussions. I think there are potential areas that may be gray in terms of agreeing on what some of the positions are, which is exciting for panel conversations like this. So I saw a hand here. I'll take you. And then there's another hand there, sir. So you can just give me your name, and then the question. Try as much as possible to be very brief in the submission. If you can do it in 1 minute, 30 seconds, which is 90 seconds, or worst case scenario, 120 seconds, we can take a lot more views.
Bonjour. Merci beaucoup pour la qualité de cette belle présentation. Merci à tous les intervenants qui ont enrichi ce débat. C'est vrai que l'Afrique est confrontée à beaucoup de problèmes, à des maladies chroniques, à des maladies aiguës, à des maladies aussi tropicales. Et ma question sur le faux médicament, parce qu'aujourd'hui, le marché des faux médicaments dans le monde avoisine presque les 200 milliards de dollars, et la part de l'Afrique est très intéressante. 42% des faux médicaments sont vendus en Afrique. Il y a même certains pays où ces faux médicaments peuvent aller jusqu'à 70%. Il y a eu des cas de décès de beaucoup de gens au niveau de pays africains. Donc en dehors, bien sûr, des contrôles au niveau des frontières, au niveau des douanes, en tant qu'expert des politiques, je dirais de la santé, quelles sont les mesures qui peuvent être faites pour lutter contre ce fléau que l'Afrique est en train de vivre? Heureusement, au Maroc, le faux médicament, je dirais qu'il n'est pas... c'est pas énorme. Mais le problème des produits cosmétiques se pose chez nous. Donc il y a pas mal de produits en cosméto qui sont là. Donc quels sont les moyens, selon vous, qui peuvent être déployés pour lutter contre ce fléau qu'on est en train de vivre? Merci.
I suspect that question is going to Dr. Carter, right? Okay. Or to everybody on the panel. We'll take another question. Yes, let's take you. And then we will come to you.
Hello, thank you for all the speakers for relevant reflections. I'll continue in French. S'il vous plaît, vous avez parlé de beaucoup de choses, des essais cliniques, et je vous en remercie. Je suis universitaire, donc voilà, ça me touche. Alors, il faut savoir que les compétences sont là dans nos universités, notamment en médecine, pour faire les essais cliniques. Ce n'est pas ça le problème. Le problème, c'est surtout un problème d'accélérer le process des lois et des textes de loi, donc, et faciliter un petit peu tout ça. Alors, ma question au panel, c'est que ne pensez-vous pas qu'il faudra harmoniser les process, harmoniser les textes de loi pour avoir un vrai marché africain commun, productif, avec des échanges, etc. Parce qu'il y a énormément de disparités entre nos pays africains. Il y a l'Afrique du Nord qui suit un peu l'Europe dans tout ce qui est texte du médicament, etc. Et donc, ne faut-il pas commencer par là, harmoniser les process en Afrique et travailler sur des lois communes pour avoir un vrai marché africain du médicament? Merci.
Thank you very much for those comments as well. So you are asking the extent to which we can harmonize, regulations, harmonize systems in Africa to ensure that at least we have some solutions to address the problems and concerns we're talking about. Yes, let me take that hand. Your hand has been up for some time now. Sorry.
It's okay. Hello, everyone. I'm a master's student in IHM. Nothing to do with medicine, healthcare, or anything. But I have actually 3 questions, really quick questions. Before, I want to thank you because this panel is amazing. We have 3 amazing women, empowering women, and we need that. We need to see ourselves that we can do things, and they're representatives of us. So thank you so much for this first. Second of all, my first question is, quelle est la différence entre les médicaments génériques et les médicaments non génériques? I never really understood this point. The second one is... Was it the second one? The other question is there really, and I'm asking, is there an after effect of COVID generally in health? I'm not talking vaccines specifically, I'm not talking anything, I'm talking, is it true that after COVID a lot of people got weaker or maybe got sick after having been through that? And my third question may be I've heard a lot of individual, local, domestic, and I've heard a lot of things that actually show us that each country is only trying to develop itself. I know Africa now cannot unite in everything. It's going to be a long process. But why don't we unite in this? We've talked about processes here, but I want to go for more than that. We have amazing brains. We have the financial means ourselves amongst all of us to invest in ourselves, rely on ourselves. And mostly, how would other continents, investors from other continents, trust us and rely on us if we do not actually rely on each other first? This was my question.
Those are very, please, some appreciation. Those are very interesting questions that you've asked. I think I'm going to direct the long COVID question to you, Dr. Bigdali, right? And Abimbola as well. I mean, if you have some thoughts to share on that, I think it would be very interesting, to hear that. But I think the very important question you're asking, why are we not trusting in ourselves as Africans to start making the investments and, harmonizing systems that we think are necessary to do, right, before somebody else from somewhere else will trust us? Your reactions. I'll start with you, Dr. Bigdali.
My reaction about, I'll come to long COVID next, but about harmonization and relying on each other. I think the African Union is already doing that. I think what what I mentioned in my intervention, ce que j'ai dit dans mon intervention à propos de l'Union africaine, en fait, l'Union africaine a mis en place un processus d'harmonisation des processus régulatoires du médicament. Et ce processus est vraiment en route avec des comités techniques. Il y a 10 comités techniques qui travaillent sur les pratiques de manufacturing, good manufacturing practices, il y a les contrôles qualité, etc. etc. Donc le processus d'harmonisation est déjà en route. Il y a une conférence tous les 2 ans qui sert en fait d'assemblée à cette approche. Et donc, oui, un des objectifs de cette approche est justement de cesser de disperser les ressources qui existent entre les pays. Et donc, plutôt que chaque pays investisse individuellement dans ses processus régulatoires et de contrôle de qualité, etc., de pouvoir harmoniser les procédures, je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, et de pouvoir vraiment partager les informations et partager si un médicament est approuvé dans un pays, qu'il puisse être automatiquement approuvé dans un autre pays si les processus de qualité sont suffisants, etc. Donc ce processus est en route. Pourquoi il n'a pas commencé plus tôt? C'est peut-être là la question qu'on pourrait se poser. L'autre question qu'on pourrait se poser par rapport à ces processus, en tout cas quelque chose qu'il faut vraiment examiner, c'est si l'ambition de l'agenda qui a été mis pour ces processus n'est pas en fait un déterrant à ces objectifs. Parce que parfois, 10 comités techniques qui travaillent tous. Est-ce qu'on peut vraiment suivre le travail de chacun de ces comités techniques de façon suffisante? Est-ce qu'il ne faut pas prioriser justement par rapport à certains aspects plutôt que d'autres, de façon à avancer plus vite sur certaines choses nécessaires plus rapidement et prendre plus de temps pour d'autres choses? Donc c'est peut-être ça nécessite certains ajustements, mais le processus est lancé. Et donc j'en profite que j'ai le micro pour répondre sur le long Covid. Alors effectivement, cette question commence vraiment à être examinée. En fait, on ne sait pas encore ce que c'est que ce syndrome qui pourrait effectivement émaner pour des personnes qui ont eu le Covid. On a vraiment, comme d'ailleurs pour tout le reste qui concerne le Covid, il y a vraiment un groupe de scientifiques qui est vraiment à la pointe de ça, qui est aujourd'hui en train de se pencher sur la question. C'est difficile parce que c'est des symptômes qui sont épars. Chez certains, c'est de la fatigue, chez certains, c'est des migraines, chez certains, c'est des douleurs musculaires, etc. Ça ne se manifeste pas de la même façon pour tout le monde. Et donc, il faut vraiment pouvoir examiner tous ces cas pour essayer de trouver en tout cas le mécanisme commun. D'où est-ce que ça vient? Et donc, proposer des thérapies, parce que c'est ça le plus important, c'est d'essayer de soulager ces personnes à long terme, des traitements, que ce soit médicamenteux ou autres, pour pouvoir vraiment essayer de les sortir de cet état. Mais les cas, bien sûr, ont été rapportés dans le monde entier et méritent vraiment d'être examinés.
Thank you very much for those reactions. Dr. Abimbola as well.
I think what my contribution to just support that is that we seem to think COVID is over. It isn't over. It's a novel virus, meaning we don't yet understand it. We'll still study COVID for 10 years. We'll still be seeing the impacts. We've studied things that cause measles. We've known them for decades. But COVID we haven't studied well enough. So it's not to panic, it's just to understand that it will keep unveiling new aspects, and the medication to prevent or treat or so will keep coming. So we just handled a pandemic, but there are long-term effects to still prepare for. But I particularly love the comment you made about we have the money. If I would charge anyone, please go back to your countries and let us move the sovereign wealth. There's a trust every country has. There are billions sitting in that trust. And we need to probably tax 10% of each towards health funding, integration of an African movement to fund health. Too many times what we report is foreign investment. Too many times we say, innovation is being funded by money from Silicon Valley. How are we spending from that sovereign wealth trust fund of each country? Madagascar is sitting on it. Nigeria is sitting. Ghana. We all have that money. Yeah. And we're not bringing out a portion of it to fund it. Because you see, when we have poor health, we cannot grow as a continent. Yeah. You lose man hours. You lose innovation. You can't concentrate on work. You can't build a healthy family. You can't interact. We can't come for seminars like this. We can't learn from great people. If the whole continent is not well, we are not well. And we keep money in some banks. It's just not, it's just not right.
And I think I agree with that comment. In fact, the caution, though, is that when you go looking and asking African governments, to invest, in your own government, be careful they don't invest in wages and salaries. Because a lot of the time, if you deintegrate, and decompose the public spending, in healthcare, you're going to get nearly 70-80% of that going to compensation, right? With little investments in things like, CAPEX, that's going to look at infrastructure and health, and all of the things we're talking about, including goods and services, for example, which goes to the procurement and support of the pharmaceutical industry, because that's how we are buying medicines, for example, in the public sector. But yes, Kautal, you had a few reactions, one to a question there, sure. And any of the issues you've had.
I'll address a few questions in a
Fantastic.
Before I forget, I would like just to jump on and to build on what you just said. National funding comes when there is a political willingness, and more importantly, when there is a prioritization. As long as health or pharmaceutical industry or local manufacturing are not set as top priorities, top national or top regional, top continental priorities, there will be no funding. There will be money, and it will go
to some other sector,
somewhere else. So this is just to build upon what you just mentioned. Regarding the question by Professor Smaili, I guess, sur les essais cliniques, I'm going to speak in French because the question was in French. I'm sorry. Je suis d'accord. Il faudrait faire une régularisation et une harmonisation des lois, des régulations plutôt, pas des lois, des régulations. Et il y a ce projet, Maliem l'a mentionné, Abimbola aussi l'a mentionné, il y a le African, je ne sais pas quel est le mot en français, mais c'est le African Partnership Agreement qui a été enforced, qui a entré en force en novembre 2021, si ma mémoire est bonne, et il vise à harmoniser les régulations pour les vaccins. Il ne vise pas, pour l'instant, à harmoniser les régulations pour les autres médicaments. Donc, c'est ce qu'il faudrait faire. Ça, c'est juste un pendant de votre question sur les essais cliniques. Alors, il faut une représentation de la population africaine dans les essais cliniques. Je suis d'accord. Même sur ce volet-là, il faudrait réfléchir à comment harmoniser les régulations pour une plus grande participation. un autre corollaire à ce que vous venez de dire, et je vous invite à regarder juste une interview que j'avais donnée à Challenge, le magazine marocain, et j'avais parlé de biobank. On doit développer les biobanks. On doit rassembler nos matériels génétiques, etc. Ça, c'est une idée entrepreneuriale. C'est pas uniquement les hôpitaux, c'est une idée entrepreneuriale. On peut avoir une medtech, une société qui s'occupe de ça. Il y en a une au Nigeria qui s'appelle 54 Gene. Ils ont deux locations. So they are in Nigeria and they are in somewhere in the US. Et ils sont en train de rassembler, ils ont levé 45 millions de dollars et ils sont en train de rassembler le matériel génétique. Pourquoi il est important? Parce que c'est sur ce matériel génétique qu'on pourra faire qu'on va faire valoir et faire des partenariats avec les big pharma. Par exemple, 54 Gene, la compagnie, a fait un partenariat avec Illumina, qui est très active en Afrique subsaharienne. Elle a fait un partenariat avec Roche, Genentech. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire concrètement? Concrètement, ça veut dire que il y aura une augmentation de la représentation de la population africaine dans les essais cliniques de Roche et de Genentech qui fait de l'innovation. J'espère avoir répondu à votre question. La question par rapport à la demoiselle de HEM. IHM, pardon. Oui, la différence entre générique et non générique, il y a des essais cliniques qui se font, qui s'appellent des essais de bioéquivalence, dans lesquels le générique se compare au médicament qu'on dit princeps, qui a perdu son brevet. Et on essaie de montrer une bioéquivalence en termes de pharmacocinétique, en pharmacodynamique. J'utilise un peu des mots pompeux, mais c'est juste une équivalence dans l'effet. Par contre, là où il y a des discrepancies, des différences, c'est en termes de qualité. Pourquoi il y a des différences de qualité entre les plusieurs génériques? C'est parce que les excipients et les active pharmaceutical ingredients, on dit API, sont différents. Excuse me? Le principe actif, absolument, merci. Le principe actif, Monsieur Haji. Le principe actif est différent. Donc quand il y a ces changements dans le principe actif et les excipients, ça donne des différences. Long Covid, je pense que ça a été adressé traité par mes deux collègues, mes deux panélistes. Monsieur Sharqawi, qui nous a posé une question sur les faux médicaments, les fake drugs. It's a big problem in Anglophone-speaking countries, not in North Africa, I think. So I don't have the answer to this question for how to solve the issue. I'm not familiar with the regulations that are implemented in countries such as Cameroon, for example. Cameroon is a francophone, donc my apologies.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so those have been, please put your hands together for them. I think they've been amazing. And not only tolerating my very inquisitorial nature, but providing some answers to the questions that you have. And clearly, we don't have all the answers. I think what we tried to do in the little of 1 hour is to give some indications of things that collectively as Africans, we should start asking questions about. If we are going to build the right healthcare infrastructure that Africa requires, if we are supposed to build the right systems that are required, if we are to build the collaborative regulatory environments, if we are to understand the potential of the private sector in bringing access to medicines and democratizing the healthcare industry, I think these are thoughts that we have to take back home and ask governments as private sector leaders. Some of them are here. I think they're giving us an indication of things to look for. So we hope in the last 1 hour or so we have entertained you, but also given you the opportunity to reflect on some of these questions. And hopefully, we will not convene next year and still ask some of these questions. We'll have some solutions out there. And you have been an amazing audience. My name is Patrick Stevenson. Thank you for having stayed with us through this panel. Thank you so much.